if it wasn't written here, if it wasn't built here, it ain't worth, and I'll use the word blank because this is a PG-13
Yes, PG,
conference.
explicit, no.
So they don't trust anything. So everyone wants to build their own. And I'm not going to say good or bad. It's just the mentality in a lot of places. But we see that, a lot of companies, even the mid-sized companies, they really can't justify.
Welcome in, everybody. You're listening to Wrestling Payments, a podcast where we help payment professionals contend with the challenges of modernizing their payments operations and identifying ways to build for the future. If you're interested in payments innovation and modernization, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into it.
Hi, welcome to Wrestling Payments. I am very excited that I have with me Glenn Fromer. If there's anything in the industry that's close to a friend, I consider Glenn a friend. He's been fun. He's been exciting. He's taught me a lot. Glenn, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, Joe, first of all, thank you for having us. NEACH, thank you for having us and hosting. This is exciting. I think fun is an over-exaggeration, but I'll take all the compliments. Thank you very much. I'm with Treasury Software. We're a producer. I'll explain more later on, but basically we work with the last mile of the ACH network, for lack of a better summarization.
Excellent. Or the first mile, right?
Well, the first mile, depending which way you're looking at it. There you go.
So we are very casual here. I'd like to almost think of this as the show behind the show. So we talk about how the sausage is made. So right. I'm, again, happy to have you on here. Have to start out with the obligatory. Do you have any favorite ever professional wrestler?
Like my music, I'm stuck in the 80s, okay? So, it's a group, it's a collection. It's the Hulk Hogan's, the Captain Lou Albanos, Andre the Giant, Mil Mascaras. So it's that era. I mean, I was in New York in 1985. WrestleMania, back then they didn't number them. It was just WrestleMania. It's like World War. They didn't number it World War I when it started. It was just World War. So right. Back then it was WrestleMania. Cyndi Lauper was there. So I don't have a specific wrestler that I'm attached to. It's more of an era.
All right. Well, that's good. That's fun for me. I came up with the name. My coworker came up with the name, and it stuck, so I have to ask, who's your favorite wrestler?
Joe, who's your favorite wrestler?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'll go with Sting right now. Sting was great. Super good guy.
Okay.
Yeah, he was good.
We'll take from there. Thank you.
All right, so, it's interesting. I'm thinking as I'm sitting here, I've never asked these questions in our, meetings, groups, conferences. Where did you come from? How did you get into payments?
It was it's kind of a little bit circuitous type of route. Initially, I'm an accountant. I'm a CPA by background, and I worked, oddly enough, mostly in fast food companies. I worked at Burger King, McDonald's, Arby's, Kenny Rogers. And fun fact, at McDonald's, I actually taught a course at Hamburger University. It was called Burgernomics, but that's besides the point. And I worked mostly, of course, we had accounting work to do, but I did work with franchisees. A lot of the franchisees were all small businesses. And that, I'll hate to use the word lay the groundwork. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But, they're all having trouble with their back office systems, their reconciliations and controls. And I'll tell you this, Arby's, when I was at Arby's, we were no better. This is in the early 90s. We were using post-dated checks to collect our royalty fees from the franchisees. There were like hundreds, probably thousands of checks in file drawers. And they would literally pick the checks for the first of the month, write in the amount for the royalties on the first of every month. I'll never forget it. So that's kind of a little background going forward. Worked with these franchisees. We saw they had these problems. And in 1999, I did have the opportunity of helping start Treasury Software. And our main goal was very niche oriented. Main goal was to help franchisees, and I'll say small businesses in general, address that bank reconciliation issue. And we worked with them. We had some large clients. Initially, we had a good jump start, for lack of a better expression. And then they started telling us about other services they wanted. They wanted to create positive pay files, which we came out, I think, about 5 years later, 2004. And then the granddaddy of them all, everyone's waiting for 2005, they wanted ACH files created. And we went ahead and did that. And that's really what, I don't want to use the word took off, that became our signature product line. And, obviously we wouldn't be, here talking about anything if it wasn't for the ACH Universal. So that was kind of I'll say not how I got into payments, but we kicked it off there. Most of them, like I said, small, mid-sized businesses, and they really just requested what they wanted. And at that point in time, we had an expression, we said, chase your customers, not your competition. So there's a lot of people out there in this space, but a lot of our development schedule, our roadmap was based upon these requests. Of course, we didn't do everything, they wanted. In other words, you can't really do shrink wrap software. You can't do custom software at shrink wrap prices, but that was really what was driving everything. And, when we're onboarding, and then once time went on, we did expand, of course, past just fast food franchisees and C-store operators. And a lot of our clients these days, small, mid-sized businesses, of course, we're helping them technologically, get set up and all that. But a lot of it's just hand-holding. A lot of these businesses have never participated in the ACH network before. And so it's like I don't want to say part support, part therapist, but, they're nervous about everything. And, at this point in time, I really consider myself an evangelist of the ACH network, of the NEACH network. It's a great equalizer of small and mid-sized businesses. And all of us listening on this podcast, whether the part of NEACH, part of NEACH, or just, you're following Joe. I mean, Joe, you're a groupie. I mean, I see this all the time. And, everyone plays a role in the network. And I use this often, an analogy to like an electrical grid, a network, or even like a phone grid. But the electrical grid, you've got a power station, you've got, the main power station, you've got power offices, you've got transformers, and then you actually have the individual lines going to people's houses and businesses. And we view ourselves as a part of the network, but we're really working with that last, and they call that the last mile. Going from the power station, or I should say the transformer, to the house, they consider that the last mile. And, it's unglamorous, but the point is we view ourselves as really maintaining that last mile, helping the network with that last mile and just maintaining it.
So we talked a little bit before the podcast, and there was a bunch of questions, but I'm going to go a little bit off script now because I knew you as the ACH software guy, right? Mm-hmm. Had an easy solution. People could make ACH file formats. Mm-hmm. Really, if I'm right, your software sold as hey, you need a way to make ACH files? Here, do this. Done. Right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I didn't know you started more in Treasury stuff.
Yes. I started more in Treasury, and we kind of just worked, as far as a software company, we just worked into ACH. And I hope I'm not jumping the gun, but I mean, really a lot of our stuff, I mean, when we started, everything was, I'll say we were taking data. I mean, exactly what you said. We're taking data in, I'll say tabular format, row and column format, from an Excel file or a CSV file. We're taking that and we're converting it into an ACH file. Certainly not to minimize what we do, but at that point, we're really just a conversion utility. We're a tool, and which is great. A lot of people need that, and people still use it, for databases and whatnot. But what really helped us in that small, mid-sized market is integrating with QuickBooks. And what happened was there's a lot of clients, and we'll talk about QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, which is very, controversial. I don't want to, stir up too much controversy. I know there's accountants listening out there, but QuickBooks Desktop, what happens is, the bankers would tell their small, mid-sized businesses, send us an ACH file. Congratulations, you signed up for ACH. Now send us a file. And they'd say, what's an ACH file? How do I create one? Well, then they just press a button on your accounting system. And they say, we don't use QuickBooks. And it's not that QuickBooks has lack of resources or knowledge. QuickBooks and it's just public information. I mean, they're a processor themselves. In other words, if you want to make payments or collections through books, they charge a fee, which they're completely entitled to, and they go through there. So when we came in, and I don't want to simplify, but as a general, think of us almost as an add-on to QuickBooks. So now you're a small business using QuickBooks and your banker asks you to create an ACH file. With our software, you can. Obviously, QuickBooks natively does not enable you. There's no feature to create an ACH file. And now that the bankers, and that's, I hate to use the word popular, but probably the only time I can use the word popular. The reason why we are popular with the banks, the U.S. banks, is when I say we're on their side. A lot of times when you hear fintech, they're competing against the fintech. In our scenario, we're working with the banks because when the banks have their clients use our software, in essence, we're on their side. We're enabling their clients to send the ACH files to them as opposed to have it go along another, I don't say rail, just another processor, basically. Mm-hmm. And should we talk about QuickBooks Desktop versus QuickBooks Online or no?
I think we can.
Right.
I'm
Let's
going to
save that
talk
for later. We're going to save
Okay.
that for later because it's an exciting
right.
topic, but go ahead.
We'll save that match for later.
Yes.
Excellent. So the problem, I have a note here, the problem you solve, but you kind of nailed it just a minute ago. The problem you solve was, and this is conceptually, this is a hard thing, right? Because the ACH is a national payment system that the biggest companies in the nation use, churches use. So somewhere along the line, the developers and the software guys aren't in the company. There's no software guy in a church. Mm-hmm. There's no software guy at any, we run into, I answer a lot of rule questions. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that come up is ACH files, right? And this is a 50-year-old standard that people hand the developer, this new developer just learned Python, or I don't know what the latest name of the software is, but he just learned that, and you say, here, this really works well with COBOL. Can you write us an ACH file? Right. And it's like, what? Any thoughts on that?
Right. And a lot of people do, when I'll go from the accounting side and then I'll go out to customers. There's a whole range of accounting packages. There's QuickBooks, QuickBooks Online, Peachtree, Great Plains, Macola, Solomon, Exact, and Division, going up to Oracle and SAP. So you've got that line, and it's really exactly what you hit it on the head. You roll the clock back. It was very segmented, the participants. In other words, let's say the top 2,000 U.S. banks, I'll say the S&P 2000. Sure, all the banks are clamoring for their business, Bank A, I was about to name a bank, but I know we're not supposed to name banks. So, one bank, loses a client, another one gains one gains one, loses one. And it's a net sum of zero. There's only so many, by definition, large 2,000 banks to go along. And then they got into the scenario that said, wait a minute, we built this entire structure, whether they're Fiserv, FIS, Jack Henry, whoever they are, or, home built, and they'll say, you know what, we've got to fill, we've got this manufacturing plant that we can handle this capacity. We're using a fraction. Let's go drill down. And that's when they started going into the small and mid-sized businesses, but they found that they didn't have the tools. The lower end clients didn't have the tools for that. And that's really, I'd say, where it came in. So if you turn the clock back, well, there were two things. One is the tools weren't there. And second of all, not everybody was using a good funds model. They were still being underwritten. And that underwriting process is a killer. And we see it sometimes even with the national banks. But what they'll do is they'll approach it really from two manners. For, I'll say, I know just general terms, for the lower end clients, I didn't mean it like that. For the small, mid-sized businesses, they'll use good funds. For the higher end, they'll go through the underwriting process. And, obviously they will have different amounts of risk and what's the word I'm looking for? Amount float in the system at any given time. What's that amount? Float, I guess, whatever. Whatever. So we do see that. And, we see the segmentation, obviously, with our tool, with just on the process out media network, we see that demarcation. It's not as heavily segmented as it was 10, 20 plus years ago.
So I have lost myself in my script, but I have
No
I have
problem.
questions.
Sure, go ahead. Ask away. I can't answer them all, but go ahead.
Given what we just said
Yeah.
about the file formats and really having that access to, hey, go get an ACH file made. In today's world, any thoughts on banking technology? So from the company perspective, what's happening? I'm seeing all this ISO and all that. What's happening?
Right, right. And you know what? I realized I didn't fully answer your earlier question as far as file formats. So what happens is there are, and I was with the NEACH work group, just solely dedicated to helping developers. There are, and you'll see a lot of companies, there's an expression in the IT field, if it wasn't written here, if it wasn't built here, it ain't worth, and I'll use the word blank because this is a PG-13
Yes, PG
conference.
explicit. No.
So they don't trust anything. So everyone wants to build their own. And I'm not going to say good or bad. It's just the mentality in a lot of places. But we see that, a lot of companies, even the mid-sized companies, they really can't justify. It's not even just the development. I mean, everybody knows a 17-year-old that knows Python. But the point is to write it, to debug it, to maintain it. The maintenance, I'll say software-wise, as well as rules-wise. The rules are changing. The regulations are changing. We're adding formats, and maybe I'll segment into that. You asked about, APIs. I guess we'll talk about ISO. That changes. So you really have to keep up with it. And not only that, I hate to say the rules keep changing. And I don't mean just the Nacho rules. I'm talking about Microsoft. I'm talking about books Intuit Online. Microsoft, there's drivers, there's platforms. You've got to adapt. So of course, people are still writing their own software, but when it comes down to it, it just not common. It doesn't make common sense. It's like anything. You go to Target, you go buy a shirt, T-shirt for $10. You're not going to start, growing cotton in your backyard, weaving and yarning, and, just so you spend $10. That was a terrible analogy, by the way, but it was the only thing I could think of.
In my head, I was saying, "Ma, get on the loom. Get on the
loom. Hey, you guys, production. Wait, hold on. I have to call. I have all the kids in the sweatshop downstairs. They're behind in production. I'm looking at the leaderboard. You can't see it from here, but I've got a leaderboard for these 12-year-olds. But anyway, as far as file formats, what we see, of course, we see a lot of work with APIs. What we do is we work with APIs within QuickBooks Online, and I kind of was joking around a bit, but let me address it now. QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, the only thing they have in common is the word QuickBooks. They're completely separate animals, nothing even resembling. Now, I'm not saying good or bad because, obviously I don't get sued by Intuit, but the point is it's a different animal. And to integrate with QuickBooks Online, you're using their, we'll say, software development kit, or a component, and you're using API calls to get data, to push data back up, as opposed to some of the traditional sources. So as far as APIs, a lot of banks are writing their own. I know there was a push by NEACH at one point several years ago to consolidate, or maybe the better word was to standardize them. I don't know how far that's coming along. We don't get involved, let's say, on the bank side like that. We, of course, use APIs. As far as ISO, as far as 2022, there was a summit. There was an XML summit that was hosted by NEACH, almost about 12 plus years ago. And it was focused on CTX with the remittance information, because right now CTX is using the EDI, the 820 transaction set. And we, of course, adhere to the 820 transaction set. That's the standardized set. But we wrote I'm trying to think, version 1, the draft of what the XML would look like within the CTX file. So we have that tape, we have that talent, we have that, capability. Of course, nothing has changed in there, and it doesn't look like, and this is just from what I hear at the general payments, it doesn't look like NEACH is going away from the current format, the 94 with format at any time soon. So we really haven't invested anything in there. Of course, when and if and when it changes, we're the first ones out there. So, I haven't heard anything else from that.
And so I'm kind of trying to watch this from the outside. And you hear the instant payments are on ISO 20022. FedWire is now going to be on 2022. Chips is on 2022. Swift is on 2022. And you ask the question, is the ACH going to do that? And I guess to be fair, is checks going to look at that, right? Could checks, they have their own format.
Yeah.
Could that be worked into ISO? So the answer so far is no.
Right.
And I know this answer from, I teach. So you get questions. Why is that? Someone asked the other day, because NEACH formats will hold an EDI, they'll hold freeform, they'll hold the travel rule data,
Right.
and I guess you were part of the creation of that XML mapping tool.
It was an XML mapping tool that it was a draft, of course. It was an initial draft part of for the summit, and we followed that to program it, and it's available. Actually, we still have it today, but nothing's gone forward with that. Well, let's just say we'll follow. We adhere to all the rules, the regulations, but we're one entity. We're not pushing, and we're not.
Yeah, my coworker asked me this week. We're updating our ACH Pro product, and she goes, "Is this a real thing? TXP, is TXP a real thing?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, TXP is a real thing. Yeah,
People make tax payments. People make tax payments.
This is excellent. So we don't promote products or anything, but you guys nailed it. You nailed us. You have from what I know about ACH formats, I didn't know the rest. Nailed it.
Yeah.
Solution. You do IAT too, don't you?
Yes, we do IAT. Yes.
I mean, and anytime someone's, I don't know, this is like a full-fledged ad. Anytime someone
I want to hear to all regulate. We love you guys.
So
we appreciate you here, but don't worry. You don't have to.
No, it's all good. I don't know anyone's going to yell at me. So anytime someone says, "Oh, we're looking for something for someone to," boom. I don't know another small business focused solution. And in regard to that QuickBooks conversation, I don't know QuickBooks from the industry perspective. NEACH uses QuickBooks desktop.
Right.
I ran a side business with my son, and we used QuickBooks online.
Yep.
My accountant will not let us leave QuickBooks desktop.
Right.
And I had no choice but to buy QuickBooks online. It's a good product.
Right.
It's a lot. There's a learning
It's a lot. And I'm not here. And just I don't want to make this about QuickBooks, but just so you know,
Sure.
QuickBooks is, the 800-pound gorilla. And I don't want to say, in other words, we use it, okay? And we use the desktop. And they've been, for multiple reasons, which is beyond the scope of my personal knowledge and all that, but they've been phasing out QuickBooks desktop. And it's no secret, and they've been pushing towards online. And I think it was sometime during last year, they stopped selling desktops for new users. I guess I know that I'm some exception, but unless you had an existing subscription to desktop, it's no longer available. So if you go to I'm giving someone else's website. If you go to QuickBooks.com, you'll only see online there.
Yeah.
So and
Yes.
then of course we see our ratio, our mix of clients. New clients, of course, we see that shifting towards QuickBooks Online, obviously, and that's where we put a lot of our development in.
Excellent. All right. Anything else? I listen and I hear breadcrumbs along the way. And that idea, you mentioned it and I didn't pick it up, but the idea that, you're my cousin can come in and he said he could write a Python program for us and it'll work. It'll work once, but the minute something changes, my phone just updated and stuff still doesn't work. The compatibility stuff. So it's a really interesting, I don't know if you'd say it's an argument, but when you enter the industry, if you're in the payments industry and you're doing ACH, you may not want to recreate the wheel.
And you're right. You're one, why recreate the wheel? And you know me, I'm just a collection of cliches and old stale jokes. So, it reminds me, there's a joke about, there's a student at med school, and he's going over how to remove appendix. So he goes, all right, there's only a couple of steps. You cut here, you remove the appendix, and then you stitch them up. So it's 3 steps. And then a student raised their hand back. She goes, wait a minute, I'm going to medical school. She goes, and you're just telling us in 15 seconds, that's all you need to know about appendix? He goes, that's all you need to know if it goes great, if it goes right. The next 20 classes are what happens if it doesn't go right. And that's really it. And you hit on the head. It works until it doesn't.
Yeah, no, that's our day when we take rule calls here, and our day is all the wrongs. What went wrong? No one's calling and saying, "Hey, my entry's processed today." Mm-hmm. They're saying this broke and that broke and this broke. Yeah,
right.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anything else you want to talk about?
No. How did you get into payments? I never asked. How did you get into payments?
This is a great story. The president of NEACH used to work at Bank of New England. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend who worked at Bank of New England. Mm-hmm. And they asked the friend, hey, we need someone like you to come and work at NEACH. And he said, nah, not really interested, Joe. Do you want to go on an interview? Oh, I'll go on an interview. Just out of college. It was 1989. Things were like, where's a job? I need a job. Where's a job? Could there be a job somewhere? And I walk in, and I was computer operations technician 2. There was no computer operations technician 1.
Right.
And I stumbled into it. And then eventually I fell in love with payments and the rules and electronic payments. Someone said something like, once you're in, you never get out as far as payments goes.
You're hooked.
Yeah, but,
That's
but
great.
I've been here ever since. Yeah.
I agree. I really do feel like an evangelist for the ACH network. I really do. But I appreciate it. Joe, thank you. It's great to see you again. It's great seeing you at payments. And once I consider you a friend, what is it? Over a decade plus. I'm getting old, but you still look the same. Like.
Yeah, I think I actually met you at. It could have been before this, but Nacho was working on the finis. They were defining what a finis was, and we were part of that first group that said, "Let's go."
Okay.
I quickly realized I was like, these guys are way smarter than me.
No.
You're writing code and APIs.
I wear thicker glasses, that's all. Look smarter, that's all.
Excellent. All right, well, nice talking to you. I'll press the buttons now. Everyone remember to I have to make an announcement. Should have probably done this at the beginning. For the first time, we got fan mail with our provider, our software, and they don't actually give you a way to respond. So if you're sending us fan mail, I will collect your questions. Be sure to say the actual first fan mail I got was, could I get the article? We're on episode 46. I'm not quite sure which article they're referring to. So if that was you, tell me which article you were looking for, and we'll get it to you. But we'll have an episode just on your questions. If you want to provide questions, that would be great. But thanks for joining me. Subscribe and all that business. Thanks, Glenn. It was great.
Great. Thank you.
On behalf of NEACH, your trusted resource in payments, and our guests, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about payments innovation and modernization, you can find the Wrestling Payments Podcast on the podcast page of NEACH.org or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just search for Wrestling Payments in your podcast app. Thanks for listening.